Good morning and welcome to Great Trees and Women's Temple. Our speaker this morning is the Reverend Teijo Munnich, and her talk will be about yearning for the ancient ways. But first, Teijo, would you start us with the opening sutra?
Okay. Unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teaching.
And now a brief message about dana. In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understanding of the teachings and practice, it is offered freely as a practice of Dhamma paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this practice is done without expectation of getting something in return. This is the spirit of speaking about the Dharma. Other ways to practice Dana is to offer support to those who share the teaching, to support places of spiritual practice, and to give without judgment or expectation when opportunities arise. Those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a Dana basis. If you'd like to send some Dana to Teijo at Great Tree, you need to go to greattreetemple.org and follow the donate path. As most of you know, Teijo is the abbess here at Great Tree. She spent at least 3 years in Japan at various monasteries and temples, and she is the Dharma heir of Dain Katagiri Roshi. Welcome, Teijo.
Good morning. This title, Yearning for the Ancient Ways, comes from a poem that's attributed to Dogen, but I think it might go back to, he might have adapted it from a Chinese poem. I'm not sure, but this particular poem inspired Katagiri Roshi to name our monastery Hokyoji, which means catching the moon, and to name our city center Ganshoji, which means cultivating the clouds. And both of those lines are in the poem. So the poem goes like this: the way of the ancestors, although actually the literal translation is patriarchs, but some of us have changed it. The way of the ancestors coming from the west, I transmit to the east. Yearning for the ancient ways, catching the moon, cultivating the clouds, untouched by worldly dust, fluttering about. A thatched hut, snowy evening, deep mountain. The way of the ancestors coming from the west, I transmit to the east. Yearning for the ancient ways, catching the moon, cultivating the clouds, untouched by worldly dust, fluttering about. A thatched hut, snowy evening, deep mountain. I think what Dogen is describing here is the life of a monk. But for me, this line, yearning for the ancient ways, which originally I think Katagiri Roshi translated as yearning for the old style, which is his poetic way of saying it, I think. And Shohaku translates this as Paul, he said, I long for the ancient wind. And I know that Shohaku used to, at least, and maybe still does, he felt that things that Dogen should be translated rather literally. And I talked to Katagiri Roshi about a translation of Dogen, which I thought was very good because I thought it was more literal, so quote, more accurate in my opinion. That was before I studied any Japanese. But Katagiri Roshi said he didn't like this particular teacher because, as teacher, I'm translator, because he felt that Dogen was a poet. And so it was not good to be too literal. And once I heard at the Dogen conference, I heard a translator, Carl Bielefeld. He talked about there were 3 different ways of translating, and one was to be very literal, one was to be more poetic, and another one, and maybe this is more, and maybe I've got these 3 wrong, but I just remember him showing us these different styles, and one was more of someone more interpreting it. I mean, it's all interpretation because whatever words you choose you're interpreting, because there's so many different nuances of different words in English, and not so much, not in the characters, but anyway, I think winds might be a more literal translation. I'm not sure. And Katagiri Roshi used styles or ways, which Lauren and I were talking about it a little earlier today, and I was saying I think that ways or styles makes it a little too like concrete, or and I remember when I first started practicing at the Minnesota Zen Center with Katagiri Roshi, I thought in my mind, I remember thinking this, I'll just learn the forms and the forms will kind of carry me. And maybe that's kind of the way we start out with this practice is just, I want to do it right. I hear that a lot from people that start out, that was kind of the forms were my way, I guess, of doing it right. But I read over a lecture that Katagiri Roshi gave when he was in Japan and doing a sabbatical in 87 and 88. So I don't know exactly when this talk was given, but it was translated by one of my Dharma brothers, a Japanese monk, Dr. Ozan Yoshida, Reverend Ozan Yoshida. And he, Roshi said when he first started practicing, he went to Eiji and he was studying with his teacher, Hashimoto Roshi. And Hashimoto Roshi is somebody he really, really admired. He talked about him a lot. And Hashimoto Roshi was very particular about, Roshi didn't call it the form, but he said his style was very specific and very, maybe adhering to Dogen's teaching. And Katagiri Roshi tried to emanate that. And he used to talk, in this lecture, he talks about how he kind of did everything that Dogen Zenji prescribed. And it reminded me of how he told us, Dogen Zenji, who lived in the 13th century, we should remember, instructed his monks to how to make dirt balls or mud. They weren't mud balls, they were kind of wet dirt balls to clean yourself after you shit. And so Roshi did that. But Roshi was in the monastery in the late 40s, like 46 or 47. So, you really didn't have to do that. So the monks made fun of him for adhering so strictly to what Dogen taught. But that's, I think, what he was referring to, that kind of attachment to some kind of definition or description of what to do, how to do this practice. So Roshi felt like he had really nailed it, because he did this very strict practice. And then his teacher said to him, that's not the practice. That's not the spirit of the practice. So then he went to, he went to Komazawa University, which is a Buddhist university. And he started to understand it more intellectually. And then he went back to his teacher and he said, that's not the practice. And then he goes on to talk, because the title of this talk is 25 years of transmission in America, or something like that. So then he went to the United States, and he ended up at Sokoji Temple in San Francisco. And at that time, this was in maybe the late 60s. I think it was the late 60s. I'm not sure exactly when. I don't remember exactly when he came to the United States, but so he of course encountered a lot of hippies. They came to the temple and they wanted to do zazen. And eventually it became a San Francisco Zen Center, because at Sokoji, the Japanese people didn't care much for the hippies because they were dirty and smelly. But you know, a monk's practice is to anyone who comes, you know, you should not make those kinds of judgments and discriminations. So so they, you know, they would come and they would listen to his talks. And one time he asked one of the people that was listening, had been listening to his talk, if he understood what he was talking about. And he said, no, he didn't, because, you know, Katagiri Roshi, even when I met him, he was hard to understand. His pronunciation of English was not so clear to us. And it took quite a while for me to begin to understand how he spoke English words. And so he realized that these people who were coming to his lectures didn't understand anything that he was saying, but they would sit there quietly for the whole time. You know, and he said, in the full lotus posture. So I wasn't there. I didn't meet him in California, so I don't know exactly. But he said they sat there very quietly, and he realized that they had a strong, I would say, yearning, a strong wish to practice the Dharma, and it manifested in this determination that transcended whether they could understand intellectually. They just came and sat. And you know, many of us in the United States, I would probably say most of us in the United States, were drawn to Buddhism through Zazen practice, through the Zazen practice. So all that other stuff that a Zen practice brings, via Japanese Zen anyway, for me it was kind of new. When I went to the Zen center, there was prostrations, and I didn't understand prostrations, but I thought, well, I don't understand these prostrations, but it's good morning exercise. So yeah, I really was more interested in Zazen, and wasn't so interested in all those other things that went along with it, but just kind of followed along. And apparently that's what he experienced from these Americans, and he felt like that came to Sokoji and eventually to San Francisco Zen Center. But he said that's where he felt like he learned the true spirit of practice, which is just to, and which I'm sure was awake in him prior to that, but he didn't, I mean, was alive in him, but he didn't recognize it. So I wrote to Andrea Martin, who put together the books Each Moment is the Universe, and what's the last one, the most recent one? I can't remember. Anyway, she put those two books together, and she edited them. And so she had numerous. I mean, I have no idea how many transcriptions she read in order to make these books happen. And then she would look for, I guess she looked for a theme and drew from many different places. Because Katagiri Roshi, when he gave a lecture, he never stayed on topic. I mean, he stayed on topic, but he meandered a lot. And so sometimes he never came back to what he started with some of his lectures. So it's quite a project trying to, pull together the themes. And so I wrote to her and I said, can you pull out for me some places where he described what his understanding of these poems was? Yearning for the ancient ways is something that kind of popped out at me and resonated on some level, but catching the moon and cultivating the clouds, I kind of get the feeling of that, but it's hard for me to kind of point to what that actually might mean. So I wanted to see what he had to say. And I got to her kind of late, so she hasn't gotten back to me about that. But I did find that he had a description which she integrated into his biography, which she put together a 20-page biography of Katagiri Roshi. And she did a lot of research. She's a librarian, research librarian. So, and what he said about it in this, and this also includes a mountain name. All monasteries or temples have to have a mountain name. And actually, I guess the mountain name was Jewel Mirror Temple. But catching the moon or Hokyoji, yeah, I don't exactly know. That was the name that he gave it, just like I've given this temple the name Great Tree. Great Tree Mountain Center, it would be referred to in Japan. All temples are called Mountain Center. But in order to register our temple in Japan, we needed a mountain name. And I didn't know how to create that. So, and I can't even remember what it is right now. I got it written down. But I asked Akiba Roshi, who is the head of American practice, North American practice, to give me a mountain name. And because people said, oh, he knows how to create mountain names. So he gave us a mountain name. And so I don't really know what these two are, but Hokyoji is catching the moon, and that's the name of Katagiri Roshi. And then Katagiri Roshi also gave it a mountain name, which is Jewel Mirror Temple. And so about this name of Hokyoji, he says it's the image of the moon is the symbol of our highest aspirations for life and the perfect ideal illuminating life. So for him, the image of the moon is the symbol of the highest aspirations for life and the perfect ideal illuminating life. And I know that, there's the image of the finger pointing at the moon and the moon representing the teachings. So the teachings, I think, might be, or how we understand the teachings, or how we embody the teachings, might be the highest ideal. But also, the word Dharma also means reality or truth, things as they are. So, our highest aspirations and our perfect ideal illuminating life, I think, come from our bodhicitta, our original awakening that caused us to want to do a practice, do a spiritual practice, caused us to want to be in touch with that awakening. And that awakening is not something, it's not something that's easy to describe, because it's not an intellectual awakening. It's something that just, it's really what I think bodhicitta ultimately is letting go, kind of disconnecting from something that we're very attached to. So I think anytime that we experience that letting go, of any delusion or any attachment that we have, that this is bodhicitta. So if we pursue the spiritual practice, bodhicitta may bring us to the practice, but it's easy to forget it, and it's easy to want to attach to something in practice, like the forms, or, but it doesn't matter, whatever. I remember Katagiri Roshi saying, even if you feel like you're pretending, anyway, do the practice, just continue. And so at various times in the practice, we experience this feeling of, I don't understand this. I don't really know what I'm doing. So it's not really working for me. I've experienced this many times in the practice. So it was very helpful for me to hear that, even if you feel like you're pretending, he said, just do the practice. And I was thinking, when I was thinking about yearning for the ancient way, I remember this experience that I had, because this yearning for the ancient way, what it brings up for me is this question of how much of what we might call tradition, how much of what has been passed down or transmitted is valuable for us in our practice today, and how much and what is not relevant and needs to be created more as more relevant for this culture, for our culture and for our time, for the way the world is now. And so this has been a big question for me for a long time, because in Catholicism, I was one of those people that wanted to get rid of all of that tradition, thinking it was just all cultural overlay that had developed for hundreds of years. And so I wanted to get rid of all of it. I was a teenager, and all that stuff is just, extra. It's just, and wanted to put the mass into English and all of that, and so I kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater. That was kind of my approach. And then fast forward many years later, when I got into Zen, 8 or 9 years after I stopped practicing Catholicism, after I left the convent, I encountered Zen, and one day my mother said to me, well, she said, you were one of those people that wanted to throw out all the tradition in the Catholic Church, and now you're embracing this very traditional religion, spiritual practice. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I am. What's that all about? So that brought up that question for me of, there is something very relevant, actually, even today in the tradition. There is something that I'm drawn to. And what is it? And when we founded Hokkyoji, and Katagiri Roshi brought this poem to my attention, Yearning for the Ancient Ways. And I like the ancient winds, actually, because what we were talking about this morning is winds. It has more of the sense of impermanence, and yet the ancient winds carry some spirit that can't be denied. It kind of takes us out of this context of looking at life as past, present, and future, and puts it all into the present. I sometimes talk about how because everything is interconnected, things are always changing and exchanging in life, and that life isn't, when we die, we don't just disappear, we're recycled. Energetically, we're recycled. I really think that's true, and I think that's what interconnectedness or interdependence really points to. So he says, the moon is our highest aspirations for life and the perfect ideal illuminating life. And then Roshi goes on to say, we can strive to touch or catch it. See, that word catch is kind of misleading, I think. But anyway, yet practically speaking, there's no way to truly catch the moon. However, this does not mean that we don't try or that we don't care about the perfect ideal in our lives. On the contrary, we have to be a constant reflection of that perfection. We have to be a jewel mirror, reflecting the moon so exquisitely, that it is possible to think that the moon that is reflected is exactly the moon. Of course, it is not, but still our lives must become this clear reflection of highest reality, a jewel mirror untouched by worldly dust. This is our practice for each moment. One of the things that this brings up for me is something that I constantly have to remember, but that I have noticed, that I have become aware of over the years, and that is, when I first started giving talks at Minnesota Zen Center, I was really worried because I felt like I don't understand this correctly. Again, it goes back to this idea of correctness. And over the years, I've come to realize that there is no correct way to interpret the teachings. That when the teachings awaken something in us, that is the true teaching. And there are people now that come back to me when I go to Minnesota Zen Center and say, I heard you say this in a lecture, how many years ago, back in the 70s. And it changed my whole life, and I always say, are you sure that was me? Because it doesn't really, it was like, wow, that would change my life too. But these things, these awakenings come up for us even in the midst of our delusion. And maybe because of our delusion, the real awakening is to let go of something we're deluded about. And so when we talk about this practice, and when we learn about this practice, and when something resonates for us, it's because we're able to let go of something. I had what I call the big disconnect. And some of you may have heard me talk about this. Maybe it was, I don't know, 10 or more years ago. 10, I don't know, but. And I was at Great Tree. Yeah, well, it was within the last 20 years. So I pinned it down, huh? So I had this big disconnect where I stood up one day and I thought, what is this, 21st century woman doing in these 13th century monk's robes? I felt completely disconnected to that. And I thought, how did I get here? And then when it was time to do zazen, I would put on my robes and come into the zendo and feel totally comfortable about being in these robes. There was a part of me that didn't want to put on the robes. And there was a part of me that when it was time for zazen, I put on the robes and came to the zendo. And it kind of punctuated or underlined or bolded that that connection to the ancient winds. Because something about Katagiri Roshi's approach to that, I mean, the fact that he chooses this poem to name the two temples that he founded, there was something in him that was yearning for that. And that's why he wanted to found Hokyoji, I'm sure. That's why he wanted to share his experience of the practice with us. And we got that because he had embodied that. And so when I titled this talk, I felt like I'm still asking that question. And I said last week, and Cohen Franz's talk last week brought that up for me too, because he had that, 12-year immersion in Japanese temples and monasteries, or maybe it was longer. I think that's what it said in his bio, and so he had that same kind of feelings of disconnect, like, what is this all about? What is this? And I mentioned that for me, a lot of my reason for going to Japan is I wanted to try and figure out for myself what experiences of the tradition would awaken something in me, and what of it was just Japanese overlay. And maybe I did figure that out to some extent, but I was still feeling like the question was there when Teijo went to Japan. I said, would you please think about this when you go to Japan and come back and report to me what you figured out, because I'm still asking this question. And I think that in Japanese Zen, for me, when you go to the monastery in Japan, we ate the traditional diet. Now, people in Japan don't, they do, but it's not, they have McDonald's and Pizza Hut and, all of that. And so their diet is very westernized in a lot of ways. But in the monastery, things are done in a very traditional way. You can't just turn on your electric bath and it just heats up the water. You got to feed the fire heats it, and you got to not make it too hot. So you got to know what kind of wood makes it too hot, and what when to tone it down so that somebody doesn't burn themselves when they get in. So it's and we chop wood, and we grew our own food, and we went out hunting for getting wild vegetables, in the spring and the fall, or at least once a year. I don't remember when we did it. I just went, and for a day we would just go out and do that. So very traditional experience in the monastery. And there's something about, living with the land so closely. I think that is part of the monastic tradition that's been carried forward. And then the spirit of it. What is the spirit of it? The spirit of living together and following the schedule. And Katagiri Roshi, when he described it to us, he said it's like putting a snake into a bamboo pole. And I immediately, when I heard that image, it was when we were starting Hokyoji, I thought I was like, wow, that's what I want to do. And I extracted it and we made a flyer for Hokyoji, and I said, this is the quote. I went back and found it and his talks and his recordings, and I transcribed it, and I said, we should put this quote in the flyer. And it did go into the flyer because I was in charge of the flyer. But a lot of people were saying to me, we don't like that image. And Katagiri Roshi was saying, usually a snake winds around, but if you put it into a pole, it becomes straight, And that's the way it feels in the monastery, it's really, I call it sensory deprivation, because it wasn't really because we were in nature, but the usual kind of things that we used for stimulation or excitement weren't there. And I wrote about it at one point. I can't find it where I wrote about it, but for the Minnesota Zen Center newsletter, and I said, being in the monastery and is like, it's so boring. It's like watching dust. You can watch the dust collect on the windowsills, and that's the way it felt to me. It was after about a year, and it is that feeling. The schedule makes you feel like, I don't want to do this right now, but anyway, unless you're sick, there's no excuse. If you don't show up, someone comes and gets you and says, come on, time to do this. So it's a very kind of restrictive thing, but what it does is it causes you to act with others all the time. Sometimes you don't feel like doing things with others. Sometimes you want to, I was in a room with 2 other nuns, and there were 2 times a year when we could go out for 10 days between the practice periods. And we had to sign up so that there would always be people there to take care of the temple, to be there. And so everybody wouldn't go at once. And one time, both of my roommates signed up to go at the same time, and they didn't realize they'd done it. And I was like, wow, this is so great, because the only time I could ever be by myself was when I went to the bathroom, or when I went to take a bath. And yeah, that's not even common, but we had the nuns had their own bath. The monks all took baths together, but they came back and they said, we are so sorry that we both left at the same time, because Japanese culture is very, homogenous. It's an island and there's a lot of people, so they all have to kind of find ways to be together. And so they have this feeling, this sense that if you are alone, that you become very lonely. And we don't feel that way so much here in the United States. We kind of enjoy our alone time. But that experience of being with people all the time and doing everything you do with other people, and sometimes just wanting to say, just leave me alone, just let me be by myself. It's a very, very important and valuable experience to not be able to escape. This is something that it's easy for us to forget. And when we have sesshin, when we're all here or online, and everyone commits to the schedule and you're committing to each other, you can kind of touch that feeling. And sometimes, especially when you're in person, people do things that annoy you, and you wish that they'd not stop doing that, but you have to come to terms with it for yourself. So there's a lot of valuable experiences in these traditional ways of doing things. And in Japan, they don't stay in the monastery for life. It's just something that you touch. And it was like Cohen was talking about, when you go to the monastery, you go up the mountain and you have this experience of the spirit of practice, and then you come down the mountain, but you bring the mountain with you. So you try to, Dogen Zenji talks about it as continuous practice. Whatever you're doing in the monastery, whatever you're doing when you leave the monastery, you bring the spirit of your zazen practice with you. So I noticed, I found this morning, so this is going to be a little disorganized, but I found this morning that Shohaku had written about this poem. So I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. We've got about 10 minutes. And his translation is a little different from Katakiri Roshi. He says the ancestral way comes from the west, coming from the west, I transmit to the east. Polishing the moon, cultivating clouds, I long for the ancient wind. How could red dust from the mundane world fly up to here? Snowy night in the deep mountain in my grass hut. Now, Shohaku goes on to talk about what was actually Dogen's writing and what came from China and what came. So this is the one he evidently decided on because it's in, this is the one that he chose to put in the, what's it called? The Ehe Koroku. I'll show you the book. This is this is not the Shobogenzo. This is Dogen's. It's called Dogen's extensive record, and he talks about living in the monastery, and he talks about oryoki. He gives instructions about how to do use the bowls, and so this is also included his poems. So that's what Shohaku decided on, and he says he says kon shugetsu is cultivating underneath the clouds, planting seeds in the moonlight. Kon shugetsu, cultivating underneath the clouds, planting seeds in the moonlight. He says this phrase describes a farmer's diligent hard work. The farmer cultivates the field during the daytime underneath the clouds and sows seeds in the moonlight. He works all day until evening. And so this describes a monk's diligent, continuous practice. And so, Katagiri Roshi, when we founded Hokkyoji, he wanted to have a monastery as a place where he could give us more traditional training. And then Chogetsu, he said, Chogetsu koun can be interpreted in two ways. The first is what he describes above, this diligent, continuous practice. A fisherman is fishing in the moonlight, and a farmer is cultivating the field underneath the clouds. It means that the monks are practicing diligently day and night, the same as the fisherman and the farmer working in their respective places. And there's a possible second meaning, fishing for the moon and cultivating the clouds. Both the moon and the clouds are object of the verbs fishing and cultivating. In this case, monks are doing different kinds of work from that of the fisherman and the farmer. The monks are fishing for the moon, the true reality of all things, or the universal truth, and cultivating the clouds, the field of emptiness. So this is obviously, I'm just kind of throwing this at you because I haven't really thought about this that much, but I might talk about this more when I figure it out a little better and get a little bit more clarity about it. But basically, I think what I'm trying to discern is I think this is an ongoing thing, but what about sort of the traditional practices and the traditional ways are still very relevant, and what needs to be kind of tweaked. And for this reason, it's been very difficult for me to describe the mission and vision of Great Tree, because I feel very much like, as Katagiri Roshi alluded to, this dual mirror is something that is, on one hand, the truth. We are embodying and expressing the truth through our practice. And on the other hand, we have to keep questioning our understanding of the truth. We have to keep noticing how it's reflected and what it is that we're seeing. And this, just points back to Zazen practice. And I think this is what Katagiri Roshi saw when he first came to America, is that sincere Zazen practice, that sincere awareness that those of us that are just kind of finding this practice. I didn't even know it was Buddhist when I first started. Through Zazen, when I first started doing Zazen, I remember thinking, I don't want anybody to tell me what this is. I just want to sit here and see what happens when I sit here. And, part of it is I think I kind of absorbed Katagiri Roshi's spirit just by sitting. And part of it is that I saw how, when we look at things, kind of, we call this watching your own movie in Minnesota. I don't know where that phrase came from, but I think it's a good description of what happens when you sit on a cushion. You kind of, your day shows in front of you, or some of the things you're stuck on. It's kind of like watching a movie in front of you on the screen. And these things come up, and it isn't until afterwards that we recognize what happened. We kind of say, oh yeah, I noticed that. Or we talk about it afterwards. I sometimes say to people during sesshin, if you feel like nothing is happening here, that's okay, because afterwards you will find that a lot was happening because you're talking about it. Oh yeah, this, yeah, oh this, oh yeah, and so it's not, at the time that it's happening, you can't know that it's happening because it's happening in the context of interdependence and impermanence. So I feel like, if we try to define what it is that we're trying to do in this practice, we can easily get stuck. And it's very common for it to get defined very, very clearly. So I think it's important for us to remember that this practice is not about understanding something or catching the moon, because we can't catch the moon. But as Katagiri Roshi says, we have to constantly be going in the direction of our what it is that we're seeking, our bodhicitta. And bodhicitta, you heard me talk about bodhicitta, is not something, it's that letting go, but we don't know what we have to let go of. So, to believe that we can let go, sometimes if anger comes up, I say, oh, I have to let go of this, but I don't know what it is that I have to let go of about it. So I have to sit with it. And as I sit with it, different things about what is bringing about that anger, which is my own belief system, my own delusions, and then something that triggered it, and whatever it is that I blame. And there's lots of things that we can point to that, I call unpacking your suitcase of delusions, So anyway, we've got a few minutes if anybody wants to say anything. I don't know if any of this made any sense.
Good morning, first of all. When you were speaking, there was so much that was resonating with me that I'm going to have to do it through Dokusan, which I would like to do when we can schedule it. But the path that I am walking is some comments about what you had to say. The path I'm walking is dual because I am Christian. I'm Episcopalian by denomination, and there's a lot of dealing with things that you're talking about. Forms and traditions is also a constant source of debate and contention, especially like within Protestantism, of taking things literally and losing the meaning of it. But I've also received the precepts I'm also following the Buddha way. And that duality is always in tension in my life. And in the last year, I have become serious about becoming a priest in the Episcopal Church. And I realized, and I was talking to a friend of mine about this recently, some of my practice has fallen away. And I in talking to him about this, I said, this was a mistake because this practice nourishes me. And I said, it, in my mind, that there's no separation because they are together, and it's just one thing. It's my life, and they both have a place in my life. And when you were talking about the spirit and kind of this kind of intangible thing that you can't define, it reminded me very much. There's a one liner in John, the wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, and you don't know where it comes from or where it goes. And it's that way with everybody who's born of the Spirit. I think it's that way in practice, and I think what I'm trying to do is find a path forward in my practice where I don't have to let go of practice, because I've continued to do my practice, but I don't have to let go of that. And I don't have to cling too tightly to one thing or the other. And it's like trying to find that balance in life. But what you had to say about this was resonating with me in a way that I know I'm going to go away from this talk, and then down the line, I'm going to say, oh, that exactly like you were saying. So I think that's what's happening. But I just wanted to let you know that what you had to say this morning resonated with me in ways that I can identify, and I'm sure are going to resonate with me in ways that will come up in my practice as I go forward. But thank you.
I just wanted to make an observation that when you're trying to come up with a document or a statement about Great Tree, that maybe if you don't try to put it all together in a kind of prose thing, but if you could maybe drop in some of the experiences of your journey, like, I want to just sit here, I don't want anyone to tell me things, as like, and then don't explain it to death, just let it, I don't know what, be a heading or a footing or a something for whatever you're talking about. I think that, if you listen to your talk today, you would find a number of those kind of seminal experiences that you said in a casual way, just talking to us, that could be really helpful in laying out what is Great Tree about, and I sure hope that you would include in there what you mentioned about being open to adapting forms and all, because if it's going to be a statement for the future, all those kinds of thoughts will be, I think, so important eventually. But I think you said a lot of things here that, could be pulled out and put there.
Thank you.
And thank you, Teijo. One of the things that I heard in your talk was I just found Okamura's does a lot of Zen or Zoom talks about about opening the hand of thought, and in the preface to that, Yoshijima talks about
Uchiyama. You're talking
Yoshiyama.
about Uchiyama, yeah.
Yoshiyama. He talks about in the preface, and that's as far as I've gotten, it's a preface and the forewords so far, but he talks about bringing the tradition of the Orient to the East. And I wonder if he had Dogen's poem in mind when he was thinking about that, because it sounds like what you were talking about today, bringing from the West to the East, from Japan, from the tradition into the United States, into America, to bring that to Americans. That's
Is that forward written by Shohaku? Is that what you're saying?
no, the forward I think was written by Uchiyama,
Uchiyama? Uchiyama
Uchiyama.
never lived in the United States.
but I think he wrote the forward, but he talks about that maybe it was Okimura, but that wrote the forward. I know he wrote they were all three authors, all three translators, and the two translators and the editor all wrote something
Oh,
at
yeah.
the front of it. So, but I thought that
he
was
might have, Uchiyama Roshi might have alluded to that too. I mean, he coming from let's see, how does it go? It goes there, Dogen was talking about it coming from China, right?
Right.
probably, yeah.
So he said, coming from the West, I transmit to the East.
See, and to me, that's what,
He learned it in
China.
China and brought it to
Yeah.
Japan. And then Japan took it to the United States.
Yeah,
Coming from the
yeah,
West.
yeah, that's what I was hearing, and I appreciate that. And
And clearly, this is not a very comprehensive understanding that I have of this particular poem.
but it's wonderful, and I appreciate it, and it's connecting for me as well as you. Thank you.
Teijo, can I just really quickly say I have regards from a friend or someone who knows you. I was on the San Francisco Zen Center. They're studying Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind with their group, but Fu Schroeder.
Oh yeah, I was at Tassajara with her.
Yeah, she was asking where I had practiced, where I received the precepts. So I told her with you, and she, I know Teijo. Say hello. So her regards.
Thank you. Okay, let's finish up.
Okay.
We'll chant and then I'll do my bows and say, have a good day. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
Have a good day, everybody.